I don't think I've ever been intimidated by another actor. That movie confused me, though. I remember when I saw it, I was like, I wasn't keeping up with it.
You think you know Crimson Tide is a tense submarine thriller about nuclear war, but the real battle was happening between Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman.
You seem to have the pulse of the men.
Thank you, sir.
Two method acting titans whose personal clash mirrored the very conflict their characters were fighting on screen.
You repeat this order or I'll find somebody who will!
Behind the military precision and nuclear tension lie shocking secrets about ego wars, Quentin Tarantino's uncredited rewrites, and a production where the confined submarine set created real psychological pressure that nearly exploded into actual violence. What you're about to discover will shock you. A director fighting to maintain control while producers tried to hijack his film, actors who couldn't separate their characters from their real personalities, and a script that was secretly transformed by Hollywood's most controversial writer. The submarine was a set, but the power struggle was devastatingly real. Tony Scott, director. Let's start with Tony Scott, the visual maverick who brought his MTV-style kinetic energy to a military thriller and created something that horrified naval purists but captivated mainstream audiences. But what most people don't realize is that Scott was fighting a war on multiple fronts, against studio interference, military advisors who questioned his approach, and his own insecurities about living in his brother Ridley's shadow. Scott's most controversial decision was treating a serious military drama like an action spectacle, using rapid cuts, dramatic lighting, and rock music montages in a story about nuclear brinkmanship. Naval consultants were appalled by his approach, arguing that real submarine operations were methodical and precise, not visually explosive. But Scott understood something they didn't. Audiences needed visceral excitement to stay engaged with a film that was essentially two men arguing in a metal tube. The most shocking revelation about Scott's direction was how little control he actually had over the final product. Producers Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, the blockbuster titans behind Top Gun, fought Scott constantly over the tone and pacing. They wanted a crowd-pleasing action film, while Scott was trying to create a serious meditation on military authority and nuclear responsibility. The tension became so severe that Scott threatened to walk away from the project multiple times. But here's what stunned industry insiders. Scott's visual style was partly compensation for his own feelings of inadequacy. His brother Ridley had already established himself as a serious auteur with Blade Runner and Alien, while Tony was still trying to prove he was more than just a commercial director. Every dramatic camera angle and stylized lighting choice was Scott's attempt to demonstrate artistic vision that would earn critical respect. Denzel Washington, Lieutenant Commander Ron Hunter. Denzel Washington's portrayal of Lieutenant Commander Ron Hunter was a calculated career move that transformed him from a respected actor into a leading man who could carry major studio productions. But the secrets behind his preparation reveal an actor who understood that playing a black officer challenging white military authority in 1995 carried significance far beyond the script. Washington's most profound preparation involved studying the emerging generation of military officers who had been educated after Vietnam, men who questioned traditional authoritarian leadership and believed in more thoughtful approaches to command. He discovered that the post-Cold War military was experiencing a generational divide similar to what the film depicted, with younger officers trained in complex geopolitical thinking clashing with older commanders who still operated under rigid Cold War assumptions. The most challenging aspect of Washington's performance was navigating the racial subtext that the script never explicitly addressed. A black officer challenging a white captain's authority to launch nuclear weapons carried enormous symbolic weight, especially given America's history of questioning black authority and competence. Washington understood that Hunter couldn't be wrong. If his character made mistakes or showed weakness, it would reinforce racist stereotypes about black leadership. But here's what shocked the production team. Washington's method approach created real tension with Gene Hackman that went far beyond professional acting. Washington would stay in character between takes, maintaining Hunter's formal military bearing and intellectual superiority even during breaks. This constant performance irritated Hackman, who preferred to relax between scenes, creating an atmosphere of genuine hostility that served the film's central conflict, but made the working environment increasingly uncomfortable. Washington's military research went deeper than learning procedures and protocols. He spent time with actual submarine officers, discovering the psychological profile required for underwater service, the ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, to make life or death decisions with incomplete information, and to maintain authority in confined spaces where every interaction was magnified. He learned that submarine officers were often more cerebral than their surface Navy counterparts, a characteristic that became central to Hunter's identity. Gene Hackman, Captain Frank Ramsey. Gene Hackman's transformation into Captain Frank Ramsey revealed one of Hollywood's most intense actors, bringing decades of authority and barely controlled rage to a character who represented everything dangerous about military tradition. But the secrets behind his preparation show an actor whose personal approach to the role created genuine conflict with his co-star and director. Hackman's most controversial preparation method was his decision to embody Ramsey's authoritarian mindset, both on and off camera. He would arrive on set already in character, barking orders at crew members and maintaining the captain's imperious attitude during all interactions. This method approach was intended to create authentic tension, but it alienated cast and crew members who found Hackman's behavior genuinely intimidating rather than professionally appropriate. The most shocking revelation about Hackman's performance was how much of Ramsey's psychology came from his own experiences with authority and aging. Hackman was in his 60s during filming, and he channeled his own fears about becoming obsolete into Ramsey's desperate need to prove his relevance. The captain's rigid adherence to tradition and hostility toward Hunter's new way of thinking reflected Hackman's own complex feelings about changing Hollywood and his place in it. But here's what created the most tension on set. Hackman's attempts to dominate the production extended beyond his performance. He would suggest camera angles, question Tony Scott's directorial choices, and try to rewrite dialogue to give Ramsey more authority. Denzel Washington later described working with Hackman as managing an ego that wanted to be both star and director, a challenge that required diplomatic skill to navigate without destroying their on-screen chemistry. Quentin Tarantino's secret rewrites. The most explosive secret behind Crimson Tide wasn't visible on screen, but audible in every crackling exchange between characters. Quentin Tarantino had secretly rewritten massive portions of the script, transforming a conventional military thriller into something far more electric and unpredictable. Tarantino's involvement came through an unusual arrangement where he was paid substantial money to punch up the dialogue without receiving screen credit. Fresh off Pulp Fiction's success, he spent just a week rewriting scenes, but fundamentally altered the film's DNA. The famous Silver Surfer debate between Ramsey and Hunter, pure Tarantino. The pop culture arguments about war films and submarine movies, his signature style injected into military formality. What stunned producers was how Tarantino transformed rigid military characters into recognizable humans who discuss comic books and movies between life or death decisions. This cultural specificity made officers feel authentic rather than generic, giving audiences entry points into an otherwise alien military world. The studio buried Tarantino's contribution to avoid Writers Guild complications, but insiders knew the crackling dialogue that elevated Crimson Tide above standard action fare came from Hollywood's most distinctive voice working anonymously in service of someone else's vision. The supporting cast. The officers surrounding Ramsey and Hunter weren't mere background players. They were carefully crafted characters whose actors brought surprising depth to roles that could have been forgettable. Their performances created the moral complexity that transformed a two-man power struggle into an ensemble examination of military ethics. Viggo Mortensen's weapons officer carried quiet menace that hinted at dangerous loyalty to Captain Ramsey. Mortensen researched weapon systems obsessively, understanding that his character's technical expertise made him potentially the most lethal person aboard. His subtle performance suggested someone capable of violence if given proper authorization. James Gandolfini, years before Tony Soprano, brought working-class authenticity to Lieutenant Dougherty. His performance hinted at the charismatic menace that would later define his career, playing a man torn between following orders and doing what seemed morally right. George Zunza's chief of the boat represented institutional memory, the career sailor who had seen commanders come and go. His real Navy experience informed every gesture, creating authenticity that grounded the film's more theatrical moments. These supporting performances created the texture of submarine life, showing how command decisions rippled through crews where everyone's survival depended on collective competence and trust. Inside the submarine, the USS Alabama wasn't just a movie set. It was a psychological pressure cooker designed to replicate the authentic claustrophobia and tension of nuclear submarine service. But what happened inside that constructed metal tube went far beyond acting, creating genuine stress that mirrored the story's escalating conflict. Production designer Michael White spent months researching actual ballistic missile submarines, creating a set so accurate that Navy consultants were startled by its authenticity. Every valve, gauge, and control panel was functional or realistically simulated, creating an environment where actors couldn't escape into Hollywood artifice. The physical conditions were genuinely punishing. Temperatures inside the set frequently exceeded 100 degrees from lighting equipment, creating the oppressive heat of submarine operations. The constant mechanical noise, essential for authenticity, made communication difficult and frayed everyone's nerves. Actors reported headaches, irritability, and genuine anxiety from spending weeks in confined spaces. What production kept secret was how the environment affected cast psychology. Several actors developed genuine claustrophobia, requiring breaks from filming to recover their mental equilibrium. The physical reality of submarine service, the inescapable proximity to others, the absence of natural light, the mechanical omnipresence, became uncomfortably real for people accustomed to spacious sound stages. Cold War anxiety. Crimson Tide arrived at a unique historical moment when America was grappling with post-Soviet uncertainty about nuclear weapons and military purpose. The film's premise tapped into anxieties about what happened to massive military infrastructure when the clear Cold War enemy had vanished, replaced by chaotic regional conflicts. The scenario depicted Russian ultranationalists seizing nuclear facilities reflected genuine 1990s fears about Soviet arsenal security. Western intelligence agencies were seriously concerned about nuclear materials falling into unpredictable hands, making the film's premise feel disturbingly plausible rather than purely fictional. Military advisors provided disturbing context about actual submarine near misses during the Cold War. Several incidents where communication failures or equipment malfunctions had brought American and Soviet vessels close to launching weapons informed the film's central crisis. The fictional communication breakdown had real-world precedents that made the scenario terrifyingly credible. What Navy consultants disputed was the film's depiction of command authority during nuclear launch procedures. Real protocols included multiple failsafes and verification systems that would have prevented the depicted scenario. However, screenwriters argued that dramatic license was necessary to explore fundamental questions about following orders versus moral responsibility in extreme circumstances. The battle for the final cut. The Crimson Tide that audiences eventually saw represented only one version of a film that went through brutal post-production warfare. Tony Scott's original vision was systematically dismantled and reconstructed by producers and studio executives who wanted something more commercially palatable. Test screenings revealed audience confusion about moral positioning. Viewers couldn't determine whether Ramsey or Hunter was right. This ambiguity, intentional in Scott's version, was seen as problematic by executives who wanted clear heroes and villains. Multiple endings were shot, each tilting the moral balance in different directions. Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer pushed for more action sequences, arguing that philosophical debates about military authority wouldn't sustain mainstream interest. They demanded additional submarine combat scenes, more explosions, and faster pacing that would appeal to the action audience that had made Top Gun successful. Hans Zimmer's musical score became another battleground. His intense, percussion-heavy compositions elevated tension, but some executives worried the music was too aggressive, overwhelming dialogue, and making the film feel relentlessly hostile. Zimmer defended his approach, arguing that submarine service was inherently about sustained tension and his score needed to reflect that psychological reality. The final cut represented uncomfortable compromise. Scott's thoughtful examination of military ethics compressed into a more conventional thriller structure. Crimson Tide proved that the most dangerous conflicts aren't always about the enemy outside. Sometimes they're about the battle within. Scott, Washington, and Hackman didn't just make a submarine thriller. They waged war over what leadership truly means. Subscribe to discover more shocking secrets from Hollywood's greatest productions.